Stop everything you're doing right now. Put down your phone, close your laptop. Because what just happened in the last 48 hours isn't another market correction or policy adjustment. This is the moment the entire financial system crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. You're watching the death of Federal Reserve independence in real time, and silver just became the only lifeboat in a hurricane that's about to destroy everything you think you know about money. On Friday, January 10th, 2026, something unprecedented happened. The Department of Justice served Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell with criminal subpoenas, not regulatory warnings, not policy disagreements. Criminal charges threatening a federal indictment for the crime of setting interest rates based on economic data instead of political pressure. Let me repeat that because your brain probably didn't process it the first time. The sitting chairman of the Federal Reserve is being criminally investigated for doing his job. This isn't about building renovations or Senate testimony. Powell himself made that crystal clear in his Sunday evening statement. This is about a president who demanded lower interest rates and a Fed chairman who refused to comply. This is about the executive branch weaponizing the justice system to control monetary policy. And while you were sleeping, while the mainstream media was spinning this as a political story, silver exploded 4.5% to over 83 per ounce, because the smart money understands what this really means. The dollar just lost its constitutional protection. For 113 years, since the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, American monetary policy has operated under the fiction of independence. The Fed could set rates based on economic conditions rather than political convenience. That fiction just died. When the central bank loses its independence, currency becomes a political weapon. And when currency becomes a political weapon, that currency dies. Not gradually, not over decades, immediately. Look at the mathematics of what just happened. Gold hit 4,568, a new all-time high. Silver surged past $83. The dollar index collapsed. Treasury yields spiked despite the supposed investigation being about lower rates. The market is screaming one message. The dollar is no longer a store of value. It's now a political instrument subject to prosecution if it doesn't serve the administration's preferences. And this is just the beginning, because here's what Powell's statement actually revealed. This isn't an isolated incident. This is the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. The DOJ action is just the latest escalation in a year-long campaign to politicize monetary policy. They tried public pressure. Powell ignored it. They tried personnel changes. Powell resisted. They tried regulatory threats. Powell stood firm. So now they've moved to criminal prosecution. And that changes everything. Because once you prosecute a Fed chairman for making independent decisions, every future Fed decision becomes a political calculation. Do you set rates based on inflation data or based on avoiding criminal charges? Do you protect the currency or protect your freedom? The question answers itself, and the market knows this. That's why silver isn't just rising, it's exploding. Because silver represents the only monetary asset that can't be prosecuted, can't be politically controlled, and can't be printed away by a corrupted central bank. But here's where this gets truly dangerous for anyone not holding physical silver. The crisis isn't contained to domestic policy. The entire global financial system is built on dollar credibility. And that credibility just evaporated overnight. China is watching this. Russia is watching this. Every central bank holding dollar reserves is watching the world's reserve currency become subject to criminal prosecution for not serving political interests. Do you think they're going to keep holding dollars after seeing the Fed chairman threatened with prison for doing his job? Do you think they're going to continue accepting dollars for oil, for trade, for reserves, when those dollars are controlled by prosecutors rather than economic reality? The answer is already showing up in the silver price. Because while Western central banks have been buying gold, Eastern industrial users have been hoarding silver, and when the dollar's reserve status collapses, industrial metals become more valuable than financial assets. This is why silver surged 4.5% while stocks barely moved. This is why the gold to silver ratio is collapsing toward historic lows. The smart money isn't just buying precious metals as an inflation hedge. They're buying them as dollar replacement assets. And the replacement process is accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control it. Look at the timeline. Powell's statement came Sunday evening. By Monday morning, silver had already exploded higher. Not gradually, not over days, in hours. That's not investment demand. That's panic demand. That's the sound of institutions realizing that the constitutional foundation of American finance just collapsed and rushing to secure hard assets before the general public catches on. Because when the general public understands that the Fed chairman can be prosecuted for not serving political interests, the run on the dollar becomes unstoppable, not from speculators, from Americans themselves. Why would you hold dollars if the institution that controls dollar value is subject to criminal prosecution for maintaining that value? Why would you trust your savings to a currency whose managers can be imprisoned for doing their jobs? The mathematics are brutal. If even 10% of dollar holders decide the currency is now political rather than economic, the selling pressure becomes impossible to contain. The Fed ain't raised rates to defend the dollar because raising rates is exactly what got Powell criminally charged. They can't lower rates because that destroys the currency. They're trapped. And that trap creates the ultimate silver scenario: currency debasement with no policy response mechanism. This is what happened to the Turkish lira when Erdogan fired central bank governors for not cutting rates. This is what happened to the Argentine peso when politicians took control of monetary policy. The currency dies because the institution protecting it dies. Except this time, it's happening to the world's reserve currency. And when the world's reserve currency dies, there's no backup system. There's no global framework to contain the collapse. There's only the rush to hard assets, and silver is the hardest asset that's still available at any price. Gold has become institutional. Central banks own it. Governments control it. It's no longer accessible to regular investors at reasonable quantities. But silver is still a free market, still available, still trading at prices that reflect its monetary value rather than its strategic importance. That's about to change violently, because this Fed independence crisis isn't a temporary political problem. It's a permanent structural break. Even if Powell resigns, even if the investigation ends, the precedent is set. Future Fed chairmen know they can be prosecuted for making independent decisions. The independence is gone forever, and with it, the dollar's credibility is gone forever. This creates a feedback loop that becomes unstoppable. As dollar credibility collapses, inflation accelerates. As inflation accelerates, the Fed faces pressure to raise rates. As they raise rates, they risk prosecution for not serving political interests. As they avoid raising rates, inflation accelerates faster. There's no solution within the system. The system has been broken deliberately. And that's why silver isn't just rising. It's beginning the transition from commodity to currency. Because when the official currency becomes political, the market creates its own currency. And for 4,000 years, well, that currency has been silver. The difference this time is the speed. Previous currency collapses took years or decades. This collapse is happening in real time because modern markets move at electronic speed. Powell's statement came out Sunday at 8 p.m. Silver was exploding higher by Monday morning. The entire global silver market repriced itself in less than 12 hours because algorithmic trading systems and institutional risk managers recognized the implications instantly. This isn't a gradual awakening. This is a mathematical certainty being priced in at light speed. And the repricing has barely begun because most investors still don't understand what just happened. They think this is about Powell, about politics, about temporary disruption. They don't realize this is about the permanent destruction of the institutional framework that has supported the dollar since 1913. When they do realize it, when the full implications become obvious to everyone, the silver market won't just rise. It will go vertical, not because of speculation, because of necessity. When the world's reserve currency loses its constitutional protection, something has to replace its monetary function. And that something can't be controlled by the same political system that just destroyed the Fed's independence. But let me show you exactly why this crisis makes silver specifically the winner, not just precious metals in general. Gold is already owned by the very institutions that created this crisis. Central banks hold it, governments control it. The same political systems that just criminally charged Powell for Fed independence are the ones sitting on massive gold reserves. When the dollar collapses, they'll use their gold holdings to maintain control over whatever comes next. Gold won't liberate you from the system. It will just transfer you to the new system they create with their gold. Silver is different. Silver is dispersed, industrial, uncontrolled. The government doesn't have strategic silver reserves. The Fed doesn't have silver vaults. The Treasury doesn't stockpile silver bars. Silver exists in the free market. It's owned by individuals, by private companies, by investors who saw this crisis coming and positioned themselves outside the institutional system. When the monetary reset happens, and this Fed independence crisis guarantees it will happen, silver becomes the people's money, not the government's money, not the central bank's money, the people's money. And that distinction becomes critical when you understand what's really driving this crisis. This isn't just about controlling interest rates. This is about controlling the entire financial system in preparation for the greatest wealth transfer in American history. The government has $35 trillion in debt that can only be repaid through massive currency debasement. They need the Fed to keep rates artificially low to make that debt serviceable, and they need to destroy the dollar's purchasing power to reduce the real value of what they owe. Powell's crime was maintaining the dollar's value when they needed it destroyed, but destroying the dollar creates a problem. What replaces it? What becomes the store of value when the reserve currency dies? If they control the replacement, if it's their gold, their digital currency, their new system, then they maintain power through the transition. If the replacement is silver, dispersed, uncontrolled, owned by private individuals, then power transfers to the people who had the foresight to protect themselves. This is why the silver price reaction was so violent. This is why it moved 4.5% in hours. The market is pricing in not just currency collapse, but the recognition that silver is the only monetary asset outside government control. And that recognition is spreading to the industrial users who actually need silver to function. Every solar panel requires silver. Every electric vehicle requires silver. Every data center requires silver. Every 5G tower requires silver. When the dollar collapses, these industrial users won't be able to get silver with devalued currency. They'll need hard assets to trade for the silver they require to keep operating. This creates industrial demand that's completely price inelastic. Tesla needs silver to build cars. If silver goes to $200, they pay $200. If silver goes to $500, they pay $500. They can't substitute. They can't delay. They can't use alternatives that work as well. This industrial demand, combined with monetary demand from the dollar collapse, creates a demand scenario that has no historical precedent. We're looking at the collapse of the world's reserve currency happening simultaneously with the largest industrial silver consumption boom in human history. Solar installations, electric vehicle production, AI data centers, all happening just as the monetary system collapses. The collision of these forces creates price pressures that can't be contained by normal market mechanisms. This is why silver isn't just outperforming gold, it's outperforming everything. Because it's the only asset that benefits from both monetary collapse and industrial expansion simultaneously. The crisis is here. The system is broken. The replacement process has begun. The only question is whether you'll recognize the transition before it is complete, or whether you'll still be holding dollars when the last vestige of Fed independence disappears and the currency dies completely. Choose carefully. The mathematics don't care about your political preferences. They only care about what works when everything else fails. And silver works. It's worked for 4,000 years. It's working right now. And it's about to become the only thing that works when this crisis reaches its inevitable conclusion. Subscribe and share this analysis. Understanding these forces determines whether you survive the greatest monetary transition in American history,